Snow settled over the town like a heavy sigh, softening the sharp edges of cracked sidewalks and weather-beaten buildings. It was early, barely past 6, but the snowplows hadn't made it to the diner's narrow street yet. The only sound was the soft scrape of Daniel's boots as he shoveled a narrow path to the entrance, breath fogging in front of him, arms aching from repetition. Above the diner's windows, the neon sign flickered weakly. Maple Ridge Cafe, the only warm light for blocks. Inside, it was warmer. The radiators clanked like tired old bones, and the smell of coffee and bacon crept into every corner. Daniel peeled off his gloves and moved behind the counter, nodding to the old man in the corner booth who always arrived before dawn. Mr. Tompkins, a retired math teacher from the girls' community school, sat with a mug that never seemed to empty and a newspaper too faded to matter. Daniel poured him a refill without a word, already reaching for the grill handle. By 7, the stitching unit workers started trickling in, mostly women, layered in thick scarves and with the sharp, dry hands of people who did hard work in cold places. They came for eggs, strong coffee, and warmth before their shift. Daniel moved among them with practiced ease, muscle memory guiding every step. He smiled, always a little tired but never insincere. His sleeves were rolled high, revealing forearms built from labor and grief. The ring mark on his finger had faded, but only in color. The weight of it remained. Lena sat in her usual spot near the far window, legs swinging off the booth seat, her backpack beside her, open to a half-finished math workbook. She was 8, all elbows and earnestness, with her mother's soft eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She came here every morning before school, tracing numbers and drawing cartoons in the margins while her dad worked. Sometimes she helped him wipe down tables. Sometimes she just watched him, quietly. Daniel looked up when the bell over the door rang, 2 short chimes, and saw the boy again. 3rd day in a row now. He came in alone, small and bundled thickly in a coat too large, the fur-trimmed hood nearly swallowing his face. He kept his hands in his pockets, his head slightly bowed as he made his way to the corner booth closest to the kitchen. He didn't speak, not even to order, just sat down and looked straight ahead, until Daniel brought something. Toast, sometimes oatmeal, always plain, always small. The boy would reach into his coat pocket, count out coins and crumpled bills that rarely added up, then sit in silence until his plate was cleared. Daniel approached again, coffee pot in one hand, a fresh plate of toast in the other. The boy didn't look up. Cold out there, Daniel said softly, placing the plate down. Extra butter today. The boy didn't respond, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. From the kitchen window, the diner's owner leaned out. Frank was nearing 70, his gut long past manageable, and his voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. "You gonna keep feeding that kid for free, Daniel?" he barked. "This ain't a soup kitchen." Daniel kept his eyes on the boy, calm and low-voiced. "He pays what he can." "Barely. And I ain't running a daycare. If he's not a customer, he's a stray. I don't do strays." Daniel didn't respond. He picked up the empty mug from a nearby table, walked it back to the counter. The boy ate slowly, carefully, eyes down, never acknowledging the exchange. Later, as the morning rush thinned and the snow thickened, Lena walked over to the corner booth. She carried a small drawing, a cartoon cat in a snow hat, and slid it across the table to the boy. He glanced at it, then at her. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. Lena smiled anyway. "I made it in class. You can keep it." The boy took the drawing and tucked it into his coat. Lena waited a beat, but when he said nothing, she turned and skipped back to her seat. Daniel watched all of it from the counter, lips pressed tight. After the lunch crowd had gone, Daniel brought the boy a cup of hot cocoa. He didn't ask if he wanted it. He just placed it there, steam curling up between them. "You got a name?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice gentle. The boy stared at the cup. His lips moved, but nothing came out. "That's okay," Daniel said after a moment. "I'm Daniel. My daughter's Lena. You're welcome to sit here as long as you like, but—" He lowered his voice slightly. "You should tell someone where you are. Your mom or dad might be worried." The boy didn't react, only lowered his eyes. Daniel stood there a moment longer, then returned the grill that night after locking up and brushing a fresh layer of snow off his truck. Daniel carried Lena into their tiny apartment above the diner. He tucked her in, then sat by the window, staring down at the empty sidewalk. The boy's face lingered in his mind, not just the silence, but the absence behind it, as if he'd been peeled out of something warm and left too long in the cold. 3 more mornings passed. The boy came each time, never spoke, never missed. Once, Daniel spotted what looked like a bruise along the boy's temple, mostly hidden beneath his hood. It didn't look deliberate, more like he'd fallen or scraped himself. Still, it stayed with Daniel long after the tables were wiped and the coffee machines cleaned. The factory women started to notice too. One of them, a silver-haired woman with ink on her fingers, leaned in and whispered, "He's Myra's kid. Lives up on Birch Road, the nice house with the iron gate." Daniel glanced at her. "Myra's husband was big in real estate," she continued. "Died a couple years back. Some say it wasn't an accident." Daniel didn't reply. "She don't come out much. Keeps the boy home. He hasn't talked since the funeral, they say." Later that afternoon, when the snow turned to sleet and the wind whistled sharp against the windows, the boy drew something on a napkin and left it behind. Daniel found it as he was wiping the table. It was crude, but clear, a drawing of a diner, 2 stick figures sitting inside, a taller one behind the counter, all framed by snowfall. Daniel folded the napkin and tucked it into his back pocket. The next morning, the boy didn't show. Daniel found himself glancing at the door every few minutes. The bell remained silent. He brought out an extra plate of toast anyway, placed it in the usual spot. By noon, Frank growled, "If he's not here, don't waste food on ghosts." Daniel ignored him. The next morning, still no sign. Lena asked softly, "Do you think he's okay?" Daniel crouched beside her booth. "I don't know, sweetheart." Then, the day after, the bell chimed just once. The boy entered, but not alone. A woman followed him in, tall and wrapped in a thick gray coat, dark hair tucked beneath a wool hat. Her expression was controlled but tight, as if she was working hard to keep it that way. She scanned the diner quickly, her eyes locking on Daniel behind the counter. He stepped out, wiping his hands on his apron. "You're Daniel?" He nodded. "I'm Mira," she said. "My son's been coming here, without my knowledge." Daniel looked at the boy, then back at her. "He's welcome here." "I'm sure he is," she said. Her voice was calm but edged. "But he's 9. He shouldn't be out on his own in this weather, and I didn't even know until yesterday. A teacher mentioned something, said he saw him coming from this direction every morning." Daniel stayed quiet. "I appreciate your kindness," she continued, "but I need to pay whatever he owes." "You don't have to." "I insist." She pulled a slim wallet from her coat and placed a few bills on the counter. The boy stood behind her, staring at the floor. Daniel hesitated. He never said his name, never spoke. "He doesn't, not since his father died." Her voice cracked, just for a moment. "It's been 2 years. He was a good man." "I believe you." She looked at him then, really looked, eyes sharp, haunted, but curious. "I thought I was keeping him safe," she said. "But maybe I was just keeping him alone." Daniel nodded slowly. "You ever need anything," he said, "we're here." Mira hesitated. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder and said, "Thank you." The boy looked up at Daniel. For a moment, his lips parted again just slightly. No words. But there was something else. Recognition. Connection. When they left, the bell chimed softly behind them, swallowed quickly by the wind and snow. Daniel stood by the window a long time, watching their figures fade into the white. Lena came up beside him, tugging at his sleeve. Will he come back? Daniel wasn't sure, but he hoped so. He glanced down at the napkin in his pocket, the little diner, the snow, the 3 stick figures inside. "I think so," he said. And for the first time that day, the snow didn't seem so heavy. The snow had stopped, but a thin crust of ice glistened along the sidewalks, crunching beneath booted feet. At Maple Ridge Cafe, the day started the same as always. Daniel opened the diner before sunrise, his movements measured and unhurried, unlocking the door, flicking on the lights, heating up the grill, and coaxing life into the coffee machine. The windows glowed softly against the morning gray, promising warmth against the brittle cold. Lena yawned as she slid into her usual booth seat. She wore her thick purple jacket over her school clothes and clutched a steaming cup of cocoa, legs curled beneath her. She glanced toward the door every so often, eyes hopeful. Daniel didn't ask. He was watching, too. The boy, Eli, hadn't returned since Mira brought him in 3 days ago. No napkin drawings, no silent arrivals, no hesitant glances. The booth in the corner remained empty, its absence more noticeable than if it had been occupied. Daniel tried to let it be. He had enough to worry about. Orders to take, tables to clean, and Frank's barking voice that grew sharper every morning. But Eli's quiet presence had settled into the rhythm of the place, a thread sewn through the seams of their routine. Without him, something felt undone. At lunch, the factory workers buzzed about a new supervisor making surprise inspections. Daniel moved between them with plates of grilled cheese and soup, nodding politely, thoughts distant. Mr. Tompkins commented that the weather was expected to drop again by evening. Daniel grunted and poured him another coffee, eyes darting to the window again. Lena tugged at her father's apron when the crowd thinned. "You think he's okay?" "I hope so," Daniel said, brushing a strand of her hair back gently. "Maybe his mom kept him home. Maybe he's just taking a break." "She didn't seem mean," Lena said. "Just scared." Daniel nodded. He knew that look too well. The way Mira had spoken with too much control, like someone afraid the whole thing would break if she loosened her grip even slightly. By late afternoon, the diner had emptied out again, leaving behind the dull hum of the fridge and the occasional clang from the kitchen, where Frank cleaned with irritation. Daniel was wiping down the counter when the bell over the door rang. Not the usual chime of early workers or the slow shuffle of elderly customers, but a firm, deliberate sound. Mira stood just inside the door. She wore a long, dark coat again, but this time her hair was down, falling over her shoulders in soft waves. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes were searching, not wary like before. Eli stood beside her, coat zipped up, mittens in one hand, eyes wide but steady. Daniel stepped out from behind the counter before she could speak. "Hi," she said, voice lighter than it had been before. "We were nearby, thought we'd stop in." Daniel smiled and nodded. "Good to see you both." Eli walked to the booth without needing direction. He slid in slowly, hands folded on the table. Lena perked up and quickly joined him, pulling out a pencil and paper from her backpack. She began sketching a winter landscape with cartoon dogs wearing scarves, glancing up at Eli between strokes. Mira hesitated by the door. "If it's not a good time—" "It's always a good time," Daniel said. "Can I get you something?" She hesitated. "Tea, if you have it." Daniel disappeared into the back briefly, returning with a hot mug and a quiet confidence that made her follow him to the counter. She sat at one of the stools and wrapped her hands around the mug, eyes following her son. "He talks about this place now," she said. "Not out loud. Not exactly. But he draws it, leaves the papers in the kitchen. The little booths, the windows, the girl with the messy ponytail." Daniel glanced toward Lena and smiled. "She likes him." "I know," Mira said, then paused. "It's been hard. After Julian died, Eli just stopped. He was always a quiet kid, but now it's like he's behind glass." "I've seen that look before," Daniel said quietly. "My daughter stopped talking for a while after my wife passed. It was cancer. Slow. Cruel." Mira blinked. "I'm sorry." He nodded, swallowing. "She started talking again after I stopped trying to force it. She just needed time. People. Something to belong to." Mira looked away, toward her son, who was now helping Lena decide on colors for her drawing. "I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping him close, keeping him safe. I didn't realize how lonely that could be." Daniel didn't answer. He just let the silence sit between them, a silence that didn't demand fixing. From the kitchen, Frank bellowed, "We making this a daycare again, or you finally charging by the hour, Daniel?" Mira stiffened. Daniel leaned toward the door. Go mop something, Frank. Just saying. Nop. Frank muttered something and disappeared behind the swinging door. Mira exhaled a soft laugh. Is he always like that? Worse on Tuesdays, Daniel said, smiling. The afternoon passed slowly. Mira stayed longer than she probably intended. She watched Eli draw, listened to the sound of the diner, the hum of the radiator, the clink of silverware, the murmur of people arriving and leaving. There was something common about the routine, about the way Daniel moved through it all, as if anchored by the simplicity of small things done well. I used to come here with Julian, she said suddenly, watching Daniel wipe down a table near the window. Back when this place had red booths and that awful jukebox. Daniel turned. I didn't know that. It was years ago. We'd come after he closed the deal. He liked the pie here. Well, Daniel said, it's still terrible, but we have better coffee now. She smiled just barely. Then, as if on cue, Eli stood up and walked to her. His steps were hesitant but purposeful. He tugged her coat and held up a folded piece of paper. She took it, unfolding it slowly. Her eyes traced a drawing. For figures this time, one tall behind a counter, one small girl at a table, and a boy between them holding the hand of a woman with long hair. Snow fell outside the windows. Her breath caught. He doesn't show me these, she said. He never shows me what he draws. Daniel stood nearby, watching them both. Eli didn't speak, but he leaned into her side, pressing his shoulder to hers, eyes still fixed on the picture. Mira crouched to meet him at eye level. Thank you, she whispered. Eli nodded once. Then, quietly, he turned and walked back to Lena. Mira remained on her knees for a moment, eyes stinging. Then she stood, pulling her coat tighter. I should get him home before it gets too dark. Daniel nodded. You're both welcome here any time. She looked at him, then really looked, as if memorizing something. I might take you up on that. He watched them leave, the slow shuffle of boots over icy pavement, the woman keeping a watchful eye, the boy walking a little closer to her now. The bell over the door jingled once and fell silent. The next morning, they came again. Eli walked straight to Booth, and this time he held a dollar bill in his mittened hand. Daniel took it and returned with pancakes cut into bite-sized pieces. Lena offered him syrup in the shape of a smiley face. Eli didn't smile, not quite, but his eyes brightened. Mira joined Daniel by the counter again, tea in hand. She looked less tired this time, though her eyes still carried the weight of vigilance. Did you ever find out what happened? Daniel asked her quietly. To your husband? She stiffened. No. The police gave up after 6 months. They called it robbery gone wrong. But it wasn't. You think someone wanted him gone? I know it. Her voice was tight, sharp like ice. Julian had partners. Not all of them clean. I've had to be careful since. There's money, trusts, property, things that make people greedy. I keep things quiet to protect Eli. I don't know who I can trust. Daniel's jaw tightened. Well, you can trust me. She looked at him, searching again. I believe you, she said. The afternoon wore on with light snow beginning to fall again, soft flakes catching on the diner windows. Customers came and went, teachers, delivery drivers, women from the factory. Lena helped fold napkins. Eli stayed longer than usual. Mira stayed too. When the diner emptied for a moment, Mira leaned across the counter. Do you ever feel like the worst thing that happened to you also made you into someone better? Daniel considered that. Sometimes, he said. Other times. I think I'm still figuring it out. She nodded slowly. As the sun dipped and the shadows stretched, Mira pulled on her coat and called softly to Eli. He came immediately, but turned to Daniel as he reached the door. Thank you, he whispered. Daniel blinked. It was the first time he'd heard Eli speak. Mira froze. Her eyes snapped to her son, hand clutching her coat. Eli. But Eli was already stepping outside, face flushed, eyes wide. Lena clapped her hands in silent excitement. Mira turned back to Daniel. Stunned. Did he was that? Daniel just smiled. Sometimes they just need a place to feel safe. Mira stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then, with a breathless nod, she stepped out into the cold after her son. Snow fell heavier now. Daniel watched the flakes drift down to the soft glow of the street lamp, a quiet peace settling over everything. Behind him, Lena whispered. He talked. Daniel turned, kneeling beside her. He did. Do you think she'll come back again? He looked out the frosted window, a strange warmth spreading through his chest despite the bitter chill outside. I hope so, he said. And he meant it. The snow piled higher outside with each passing day, blanketing Maple Ridge in a hushed stillness that muffled tires on pavement and silenced birdsong. Inside the diner, life moved with a strange mix of warmth and tension, like a fire quietly crackling in a house built on uncertain ground. Eli had become a fixture now, arriving each morning with Mira and settling into the booth beside Lena. He spoke little, but his silence was no longer a void. It was filled with small, deliberate gestures. The way he slid the sugar closer to her cocoa, the soft sound of pencil on napkin, the occasional nod when Daniel brought him food he liked. The boy had learned to occupy space again, and that space stretched further each day. Mira sat at the counter most mornings, sipping tea and watching Eli from a distance. She didn't mind closing anymore. Her coat stayed unzipped longer now, her glances less guarded. She spoke more, laughed sometimes, and once even offered to help Daniel during a rush when Frank had stepped out and not returned on time. Daniel refused politely, but he'd remembered the gesture long after the plates were cleared. Still, the air around her never fully relaxed. She always sat facing the door. She flinched slightly when strangers entered, and when her phone buzzed, her entire posture stiffened. One late afternoon, when the sky outside was the color of smoke and the trees wore ice like armor, Mira lingered after the lunch crowd had left. Daniel was drying mugs behind the counter. Lena and Eli were drawing snow creatures with outlandish expressions, and Frank was back in the kitchen muttering about deliveries. I got a call today, Mira said softly. Daniel looked up. Bad. Unknown number. No one spoke when I answered. Just breathing. Then a click. He set the mug down. You think it's related? She nodded, swallowing hard. I know it is. It started again a week after I brought Eli here. It's not a coincidence. Have you told the police? She gave a humorless laugh. They think I'm paranoid. A rich widow with stress and a kid who doesn't talk. Not exactly high priority. Daniel rested his hands on the counter. You're not paranoid. If something's wrong, we figure out. Her eyes met his, uncertain. Why do you keep saying we? I barely know you. Daniel paused. Maybe, but I've seen the way you look at your son, and I know what it's like to be drowning in your own life while trying to keep someone else afloat. Mira looked down, her fingers tightening around the mug. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing more harm than good. You're not, Daniel said. He's getting better. You're part of that. A quiet moment passed. Eli looked up from his drawing, catching her eye. He smiled, small, real, fragile. Myra's breath caught again. He's the only reason I'm still breathing, she said. Julian used to say that family is the one shelter you can't buy. You build it with love, or you don't have it at all. That's a good line, Daniel said softly. It's the only thing he left behind that still makes sense. The door swung open then, breaking the quiet. A man in a long black coat entered, tall, middle-aged, clean-shaven, but with a sharpness that clung to him like ice. He scanned the diner with deliberate precision before approaching the counter. Coffee, he said, voice deep and unreadable. Daniel nodded, his hand steady though his instincts flared. Coming right up. Myra's shoulders had gone rigid. Her teacup trembled slightly in her hand. She turned her face away. The man didn't sit. He remained standing at the counter, watching Eli and Lena with casual disinterest that didn't feel casual at all. Daniel returned with the coffee. Here you go. The man paid in cash, exact change. Nice place. Quiet. Daniel didn't reply. The man took a single sip, then placed the cup down untouched. You run it. Work here, Daniel said evenly. Owner's in the back. The man nodded, looked around once more, then walked out, leaving the bell above the door jangling behind him. Mira exhaled sharply. He's not local. You know him? Not exactly, but I've seen him before. At Julian's memorial. Near the school. Never close enough to confront. You want to stay with someone? Just for a few days? I can't risk bringing this to someone else's doorstep. You already have. Mira looked at him, panic flickering behind her eyes. Daniel shook his head. I'm not saying that to blame you. I'm saying we're already in it now, whether we choose to be or not. That night, Mira didn't go home. She stayed at Daniel's place, a modest two-bedroom above a closed-down tailor shop, just a few blocks from the diner. It was warm, cluttered with the detritus of a life built on resilience. Stacked books, drawings taped to the wall, a kitchen with mismatched plates, and a calendar still turned to the wrong month. But it was safe. Daniel set up a cot for Eli beside Lena's bed. Mira took the couch, though Daniel offered her his room. I sleep better out here, she said. He nodded. I'll take the floor. No, you've done enough. Doesn't feel like enough. She smiled, tired. It is. In the dark, the quiet settled over them like the snow outside. Mira lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her son breathing nearby, steady and even for the first time in months. I don't know how to accept help, she whispered. Daniel, wrapped in a blanket across from her, opened his eyes. You just did. She laughed once, softly. You always as decent? He turned his head, voice low. No, just with people who need me. The days that followed passed in a fragile rhythm. Mira kept her distance at first, helping with breakfast, sitting near Eli, answering Daniel's questions with careful brevity. But slowly, something eased. She let him hold her hand one night when Eli woke, crying. She stood beside him in the kitchen and chopped onions for chili. She laughed genuinely when Lena and Eli built a snow fort and refused to come inside until their mittens froze stiff. Daniel never asked for more than she offered. He just made space. And in return, Mira began to give. But the threat lingered. One morning, Frank burst into the diner before it opened, face red, waving a letter. This came last night. He snapped, shoving it at Daniel. No return address. Daniel opened it with steady hands. One sentence, typed in block font. You don't know what she's hiding. But we do. Mira stepped forward, reading over his shoulder. Frank pointed a trembling finger at her. I don't care what kind of trouble follows you. I've got a business to run. If the cops come sniffing. No one's called the cops, Daniel said, his voice hard now. And she's not going anywhere. Frank scoffed. You've got a daughter, Daniel. Think about her before you play hero. I am, Daniel snapped. Frank left, slamming the door behind him. Mira sat down slowly at a booth, trembling. This is going to get worse. Daniel folded the letter carefully. Then we stay ahead of it. I should leave. You're not running anymore. Mira looked up. What if it costs you your job? Your safety? Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Then we find another diner. Another place. We figured out. Mira stared at him, disbelief warring with something else. Something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Trust. Maybe even hope. I thought after Julian that I'd never feel safe again. Never feel like someone could understand what it costs to protect a child. Daniel squeezed her hand. You don't have to do it alone. That night, Eli spoke again. They were seated around the kitchen table. Lena was showing him how to fold paper into snowflakes. Mira was beside them, watching quietly, and Daniel was fixing tea. Eli looked up at his mother. I like it here, he said. Mira dropped the mug in her hand. It shattered. No one moved. Daniel crouched and swept up the pieces, smiling softly. Mira knelt beside Eli, tears in her eyes. You do. Eli nodded. It's warm and quiet, and I don't feel scared. Mira pulled him into her arms and held him like she never wanted to let go. Daniel watched from a distance, something tender and painful blooming in his chest. The snow kept falling. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't facing it alone. The morning sky cracked open with muted bursts of light, revealing a gray dome over Maple Ridge. The The snowfall had slowed but not ceased. Drifts leaned heavily against storefronts, and sidewalks disappeared under a smooth crust of frost. The diner opened late, not for lack of customers, but because Daniel had overslept for the first time in years. Mira was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee and humming to herself as Lena and Eli arranged napkins into neat triangles at their usual booth. It felt like the eye of a storm, brief calm, tinged with the knowledge that something was coming. Daniel stepped into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and smiling when he saw Mira. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her turtleneck, sleeves rolled to her elbows. "You look like you belong here," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "Don't say that too loud. Frank might fire you for letting me near the coffee machine." Daniel chuckled and grabbed a rag to wipe down the counter. "If Frank doesn't fire me for harboring fugitives and freeloaders, I think we're in the clear." Mira didn't laugh at that. Instead, she moved closer and lowered her voice. "Last night, someone tried to get into the building." Daniel stopped moving. "What?" "Back door. The one near the alley. I heard the lock rattle. Eli was asleep, so I didn't wake him. I just waited, holding your old baseball bat." "Did they get in?" "No. I think the snow jammed the door. But they tried." Daniel swore under his breath. "Did you call anyone?" "Who? The local cops who already think I'm a paranoid widow?" "No. I waited until they left." Daniel stared at her. "This ends today." Before she could argue, the bell over the door rang, and Frank walked in. He stomped snow off his boots and glared at the assembled group. "Look at this," he muttered, "like some kind of cozy homeless shelter. You got a family now, Danny boy." Daniel didn't rise to it. "We need to talk. I've been saying that for weeks." In private, Frank crossed his arms. "Fine." They stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the back storage room. Daniel closed the door. "There's a man following Mira. He's connected to her late husband's death. And he's here, watching her, watching Eli." Frank's face didn't change. "You brought that here?" "I didn't bring anything. She was already being followed. I'm protecting a kid. And his mother." Frank rubbed his chin. "So what? We turned the place into a safe house? That's not my problem." "It is now. Someone tried to break into our apartment last night." Frank blinked. "Our?" Daniel ignored the jab. "You're either with us or you're out of the way." Frank stepped back, visibly unsettled. "What are you planning?" "I'm not sure yet. But if anything happens to them while they're under this roof, I swear I'll hold you responsible." Frank muttered something about lawsuits and insurance before pushing past Daniel and out of the room. Daniel followed him back into the diner and found Mira already moving toward him. "He doesn't understand," she said. "He doesn't have to," Daniel replied. "He just has to stay out of the way." The day moved in sluggish rhythm. Customers trickled in late due to icy roads. Teachers from a nearby girls' school ordered takeout. Workers from the stitching unit across the street stayed only long enough to warm their hands. Beneath every movement lingered a tightness, like the whole town was waiting for something. Around midday, a black SUV pulled up across the street. It didn't park like a regular customer. It idled, engine running, windshield fog from within. Daniel watched it for 10 minutes before quietly turning off the lights in the front half of the diner. Mira moved to the window, standing just far enough back to avoid being seen. "That's not a local plate," she whispered. "Nope," Daniel said, "and they haven't moved an inch." Lena and Eli sat in the booth, their drawing forgotten. Eli's pencil trembled slightly in his fingers. Mira knelt beside him. "It's going to be okay." He didn't speak, but he slid closer to her. Daniel joined them, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. Then the SUV door opened. Mira grabbed Eli's hand and led both children to the kitchen. Daniel locked the front door just as the man reached it. He knocked once, then again. Daniel stepped into view, but didn't open the door. The man smiled thinly through the glass. "No need for dramatics. I'm just here to talk." Daniel didn't respond. The man reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a wallet. He pressed a badge to the glass. Daniel's stomach twisted. Mira reappeared, eyes narrowing the badge. That's not a local division. He's not law enforcement, Daniel said. That badge is outdated. The man knocked again. I know you're in there, Mira. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Daniel grabbed the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. He didn't explain, just gave the address and said a stranger with a fake badge was trying to force contact. The man outside turned, as if sensing the call. He didn't wait. He walked back to his SUV, got in and drove off, slowly, deliberately, as if making a point. Daniel exhaled. We bought time, not peace. Mira sat down heavily. That's one of Julian's old business partners. I recognize him now. He was at the company the week before Julian died. Then it's time to expose them, Daniel said. We take it to someone higher. Press feds, someone who can't be silenced. I have some files, Mira said slowly. From Julian's encrypted drive. I didn't know who to trust before. But now, Daniel looked at her. We go together. That night, the diner closed early. Frank didn't protest. He even handed Daniel an envelope with a quiet grunt. Inside was a handful of 20s and a note for the kid. Whatever this is, finish it. Daniel didn't ask why. Some walls take longer to melt. Back at the apartment, Mira pulled out a small USB from her coat lining. This has everything. Offshore accounts, fake names, meeting logs. I didn't know what to make of it after Julian died, but now I do. He was trying to get out. Daniel took the drive. Then we finished what he started. They uploaded the files to secure email, sent it to a contact Mira trusted in federal investigations, and then backed up 3 more ways. At midnight, Mira sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest. Do you think it'll stop them? I think it'll scare them. She looked at Daniel. I don't want to run anymore. You won't have to. There was a long silence. You've been more than kind, she said. It wasn't kindness, he replied. It was instinct. For what? For protecting what matters. She turned to him slowly. Do I matter? Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he reached out and took her hand. Yes, you do. She leaned into him, and they sat like that quietly until the snowfall stopped. 3 weeks passed. The SUV didn't return. The call stopped. Myra's contact confirmed the files had triggered an internal review. Whispers of Julian's death began surfacing in news cycles. Carefully worded but persistent, Eli began speaking more. He laughed now, asked questions, played with Lena like he'd known her forever. Frank even started putting an extra donut in his bag each morning without comment. One late afternoon, Mira walked into the diner, cheeks pink from the wind, and smiled at Daniel like it wasn't a borrowed smile anymore. You've got an extra apron? She asked. Daniel blinked. You want to help? She nodded. You said I look like I belong. Maybe I do. He handed her an apron, heart catching in his throat. Lena and Eli watched from their booth, grinning. The snow outside melted slowly, but inside the diner, something had already thawed. They had weathered the worst of it, not unscathed, but together. And when Mira flipped the open sign on the door that morning, her hands no longer trembled. She belonged. They all did.